Welcome everybody to God or No God, our annual now debate featuring the Secular Student Alliance and New Life Church. This is probably about the third year in a row that we've had this event, and we are extremely happy to once again be working in partnership with New Life. We believe that it is a great way to get people of different faiths and different ideas together and to sort of educate the campus and the public about these topics and ideas. Today we are very happy to present you with Justin Schieber, who is a representative from CFI Michigan. He is the co-host of a podcast called Reasonable Doubts, which you can find at doubtcast.org. He currently serves on the advisory board of the Center for Inquiry Michigan in Grand Rapids. He, in his own words, enjoys promoting a friendly yet firm skepticism towards religious claims. He has lectured on philosophical arguments for and against the existence of God, and has participated in many public debates in the United States and Canada. And most of those videos and most of those can be found online at his website, justinsway.com. And he will be here representing the atheist position tonight.
So good evening, and welcome to tonight's debate. My name, as Monica said, is Henry Holland. I'm a senior at the University of Michigan, also graduating in about a month or so. I'm a member of New Life Church and have been involved there throughout my time here at U of M, so over almost 4 years now. So New Life Church is glad that we can team up with the Student Secular Alliance, Secular Student Alliance, I always get that wrong, to pull off this event tonight. I'd like to introduce our other guest for this evening's debate, Mr. Scott Symington. Scott attended the University of Michigan long enough ago to be involved in the street mayhem following the last NCAA basketball championship. He became a middle school and high school teacher and loved it, and then promptly jumped into radiological physics and works today as a medical physicist at a cancer center in the University of Michigan Health System. So he doesn't believe in long intros, so I'm going to stop talking and would love to invite you to welcome up our other guest, Mr. Scott.
So I'm going to tell you a bit about the format of the debate. We're going to start with opening statements, first from Justin, then from Scott. The opening statements will last 20 minutes. Then there will be a first round of rebuttals, first from Justin, then from Scott. Then a second round of rebuttals, first from Justin, then from Scott. And then there will be a period of cross-examinations where Scott will put Justin in the hot seat and ask him some questions, and then Justin will put Scott in the hot seat and ask him some questions, and then finally there'll be a round of closing statements, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So, Justin.
Well, good evening. Yes, let me turn this on real quick. Good evening. I want to begin by thanking the Secular Student Alliance here at University of Michigan for inviting me to participate in tonight's debate. I also want to thank the others involved, New Life Church, and all those involved in the planning, and of course Scott for agreeing to debate this issue, and all of you for coming out to the event. Now the title of the debate tonight is God or No God, and I've interpreted this as kind of comparing two competing hypotheses and finding out, and looking at the evidence and finding out which one of these hypotheses best is supported by the evidence. Now, the God hypothesis, I assume to be something like this. There exists a disembodied mind of infinite power and knowledge. This being is also perfectly loving. And since we're talking about the Christian God, we can perhaps add something to the effect of He sent His Son to die for our sins and resurrected Him a short time later. Now, the no-God hypothesis I want to be defending tonight is what I want to call metaphysical naturalism. My friend Jeffrey J. Lauder defines metaphysical naturalism as the hypothesis that the natural world is a closed system, which means that nothing that is not a part of the natural world affects it.
Metaphysical naturalism denies the existence of all supernatural beings. This would include God, and other supernatural beings. And so, of course, entails atheism. Now, before we look into the evidence, notice first that naturalism is by far the simpler of these two hypotheses on the table tonight. So think about it. The Christian God hypothesis is just the natural world plus a whole bunch of other stuff. But of course, when we add details to a hypothesis like this, we are adding additional ways that that hypothesis could be wrong. In other words, details to hypotheses are liabilities. You want to minimize these, not proudly maximize the number of details you add. And so even prior to examining the evidence tonight, naturalism is already more likely to be true than the Christian God hypothesis. It's simpler, and so it has fewer liabilities. Now let's talk about the evidence. Well, first of all, what is evidence? Well, an observation counts as evidence for a particular hypothesis if that observation makes that hypothesis more probable than it otherwise would have been. And so evidence for metaphysical naturalism is going to be observations that we would expect if metaphysical naturalism were true. And evidence against the Christian God hypothesis will be observations which would be unexpected or surprising if the Christian God hypothesis were true. And so the question tonight is, when we look at the evidence, which way, on balance, does the evidence point? Now, I want to argue tonight that the evidence points strongly towards metaphysical naturalism, and so it is much more reasonable to believe metaphysical naturalism than it is to believe in the Christian God hypothesis. Now, I do want to say one small point here. Now, before I present my evidences, I want to make this one point. Often when arguing against the existence of a God, arguing against theism, you will often hear things like this: but God is mysterious, right? We are not in a position to talk about what God is likely to do or not to do, to create or not create, to prevent or not prevent. And so we're not really in a position to talk about what observations we can expect or what observations we might find surprising on the Christian God hypothesis, because God is so mysterious. Now, this position seems intuitively attractive. After all, it does seem to shield you from atheist-oriented arguments. But when you look deeper into it, you see that this position ends the evidential debate on both sides. Because if this is your view of God, then it cannot play the role of a hypothesis, because it isn't even testable in the most minute sense. So not only does it prevent the atheist from making evidential arguments against God, it equally prevents the theist from making evidential arguments for God. And it also spells disaster for theism in many other ways. And so for my opponent's sake, I do suggest that we not go down this road. But if we do have to go down this road, I'm more than happy to talk about the many pitfalls of this approach in the cross-examination period. Now, for my cumulative case for metaphysical naturalism. My first piece of evidence for naturalism and against the Christian God is the existence of non-resistant unbelievers. Premise one, the existence of non-resistant unbelievers is very unlikely under the assumption that the Christian God hypothesis is true. So the fact that we are even having this debate presupposes a few things. It presupposes that it's possible for intelligent and fair-minded people to disagree on the existence of the Christian God. Now, we all know that there are many people who do not believe in the Christian God. And of course, this is not always because it's their fault. It's not a fault of their own. And many of us don't believe because we find the evidence to be either extremely poor or very ambiguous. Now, in his book, Divine Hiddenness and Human Reason, philosopher J.L. Schellenberg argues that the mere existence of non-resistant non-believers is extremely strong evidence against the existence of a perfectly loving God, the God of Christian theism. Now, at a minimum, we would expect that a perfectly loving being would want a relationship with the creatures whom he loved, both for the benefit of those creatures and for the fact that relationships are good things in and of themselves. And because of this, a perfectly loving God would ensure that such creatures were always in a position to enter into a meaningful relationship with God. But of course, God would not force a relationship on them. God would recognize that, look, legitimate relationships are a two-way street. God would simply make it the case that his loved ones were always in a position to enter into a meaningful relationship with God simply by trying. But of course, there's a problem here. To be in a position to enter into a meaningful relationship with anybody, both parties need to agree that each other exists. Now, so when we say that we should expect that God would make it the case that those whom he loved, that he would make it the case that they are in a position to enter into a meaningful relationship with God, what we are really saying is that God would provide causally sufficient reasons for his loved ones to believe in God. Because only then can they be in a position to enter into a meaningful relationship with him. Unless, of course, they were resistant. Schellenberg puts it beautifully. He writes, quote, "The presence of God will be for them like a light, that however much the degree of its brightness may fluctuate, remains on unless they close their eyes." Premise 2, the existence of non-resistant unbelief is highly likely under the assumption that metaphysical naturalism is true. So if metaphysical naturalism is true, we should expect that there would be some people who really did wish that God existed, but they just couldn't bring themselves to believe in God because, again, the evidence is either extremely poor or it's extremely ambiguous. Or perhaps they've never even heard of the idea. Now, for those reasons, we must conclude that the existence of non-resistant non-belief strongly supports metaphysical naturalism over the Christian God hypothesis. My second piece of evidence is pointless suffering. Now, most of you will probably be familiar with the classical problem of evil, which states that the existence of any evil or suffering is logically incompatible with God. However, I want to give God a little bit of a break here. After all, we do have a little bit of a history. Now, I'm perfectly willing to grant that God may have reasons for allowing certain instances of suffering to occur in the actual world. After all, it seems plausible to me that if God exists, God may have some reasons to allow suffering to ensure some greater good or to avoid some equally bad or worse instance of suffering. But this is important right here. God, if he existed, would never allow an instance of suffering unless it was logically necessary for some greater good or to avoid some equally bad or worse evil. But of course, many of the instances of suffering in the world seem suspiciously like the exact kinds of suffering that a perfectly loving being would prevent if he did exist. They seem utterly pointless. So think of the Holocaust, right? Think of slavery in the American South and current day. What about natural suffering? A suffering humans had absolutely nothing to do with, suffering that can't be blamed on human free will. Animals eating each other alive for billions of years before we even got on the scene. Think of the fear, the terror, the starvation, famine, earthquakes, floods. The list goes on and on. Real and deeply felt suffering. Now you may be thinking, well, Justin, God has reasons, morally sufficient reasons, to allow these instances of suffering. But at what point do you stand there and honestly think to yourselves, reflect upon the inconceivable number of instances of just horrific suffering in the world, and wonder, maybe this isn't the most rational conclusion. Maybe these instances of suffering really are evidence against the existence of a perfectly loving God who cares about us. In other words, premise 1, the existence of many instances of seemingly pointless suffering is very unlikely on the assumption that the Christian God hypothesis is true. On the other hand, of course, if metaphysical naturalism is true, We would expect the natural world to be blind and utterly indifferent to the well-being of all the creatures on the planet. And so we should expect that an incredible amount of suffering, of pointless suffering. After all, under metaphysical naturalism is true, we are on our own. We are not special to the universe. Premise 2, the existence of many instances of seemingly pointless suffering is very likely on the assumption that metaphysical naturalism is true. Therefore, conclusion, the existence of many instances of suffering, of seemingly pointless suffering, strongly supports metaphysical naturalism over the Christian God hypothesis. And now for my third piece of evidence for metaphysical naturalism. The hostility to life of the vast majority of the universe. This is a picture taken in 1990 from the Voyager 1 space probe. It was taken 3.7 billion miles from Earth. Now, if you look closely, right where that arrow is pointing, you can see a pale blue dot. That's home. That's Earth. Now, even this picture only captures but a speck of the observable universe, which, by the way, we know is expanding. Of course, it's no secret that the vast majority of this universe is completely hostile to life. Extreme heat, extreme cold, radiation. Most planetary orbits are completely unstable. Comets, asteroids, the list goes on. Now, if the Christian God hypothesis is true, and God has created the universe for us, then, my friends, it's a very strange and awkward fact why the universe should appear to be designed to kill the very beings which it was created to sustain. This is a very surprising observation indeed. Now, even on Earth, though, only a small portion is actually inhabitable. But again, if metaphysical naturalism is true, this isn't at all surprising, because life isn't special in the universe. And so we shouldn't expect that the universe to care about keeping us safe any more than it should care about keeping a particular comet on course. We don't matter to the universe. And so, premise 1, the hostility to life in the vast majority of the universe is highly unlikely on the assumption that the Christian God hypothesis is true. Premise 2, the hostility to life in the vast majority of the universe is highly likely on the assumption that metaphysical naturalism is true. And again, if metaphysical naturalism is true, it's entirely expected. And so conclusion, therefore, the hostility to life in the vast majority of the universe strongly supports metaphysical naturalism over the Christian God hypothesis. Now, this is a very brief case against Christian theism. And now maybe you're thinking, but of course, it's still possible that God exists, right? But remember, we don't believe things simply because they are possible. We must go where the evidence suggests. That's what rational people do. Now, the mere fact that there may be other possible explanations for the universe in no way undermines the fact that these observations are extremely strong evidence for naturalism and against the Christian God hypothesis. So yeah, there is a chance. But that's not the rational belief to hold. You need to go where the evidence points. Now, sorry, that's my favorite movie. I had to put it up there. Now, my opponent, if he wishes to show that the Christian God hypothesis is more reasonable to believe than metaphysical naturalism, must, of course, first present his own evidence, and second, demonstrate to us tonight why this evidence is stronger than the evidence that I've just presented. Ladies and gentlemen, unless Mr. Symington does this, I think it is quite clear that metaphysical naturalism is far more likely to be true than the Christian God hypothesis is to be true. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Justin, Monica, the Student Secular Alliance, Nick, Gentz, John, New Life, for your work that gives us all an opportunity to stare deeper into something very significant. We don't have a lot of time, and I'm nervous for my first debate, so let's just get started. Let's start with poor Joe. Hey, Joe, where are you? I'm comfortable, reading. No, Joe, there's a bigger picture. Your tent is in the field in lion territory, and you are not in a position to get what you need. All of you coming here tonight makes it less likely that you'll be caught as unaware as this guy. Instead of Xbox, PlayStation, or watching Bachelor, you're facing head-on one of the biggest questions in life in a debate like this. However, debates can also be very annoying. For example, have you observed people discussing Obamacare? Most of the time, I don't have anything to add, but often I'll break in and say, you know, that's Rush Limbaugh reasoning. Because one side of the argument is only giving negative shots at the Obama model, like sad anecdotes to grab you by the emotions, followed by subjective thoughts, not objective evidence, but just things that they as a subject don't like or don't understand. And that's okay up to a point. But what they don't do is provide their alternative model or explanation of how to fix healthcare and then support it with objective evidence. Because it's easy to be a skeptic, but one needs to be skeptical of skepticism too, and do the intellectual heavy lifting of providing the model you stand on with positive evidence to support it. Tonight we'll look at two worldview models, which is what we stand on to view and face life, make decisions, set goals, priorities, and maybe even determine what comes after life, God or no God, atheism or theism. I'll present evidence that the Christian God exists by going through a simple approach. Then we'll apply the same big questions in life to the no God position to show that it is less plausible and a less safe position to stand on. Let's start with something we can all agree on. We exist. Now, if we exist, there's only two basic options. Either this existence had a beginning, or the existence had no beginning, A or not A. There is no other option. Now, for our purposes, the God-no God side's divided very cleanly on this primary issue. Before all the evidence came in, the Bible claimed that there was a beginning and made a number of specific statements about that beginning. While almost every other belief system not founded on the Bible took their stand, including atheism, general tenet of that, and science, that there was no beginning. What have we discovered? Well, I know over all the evidence if someone asks. But the bottom line is this. All of the evidence states we had a beginning. When one foundation has all the evidence to stand on, and the other doesn't have any, even a graduate from Ohio State University can figure out what that means. The Bible is in a very firm foundation here. While atheism and almost all other worldviews have a failure in a core area and one of the biggest questions in life. But what is far more significant is, here's what science now knows. All that's in the universe, all matter, energy, space, time, all natural things in this closed system had a beginning. Why isn't that interesting? That's what the Bible knew 3,000 years ago. Stated the exact same thing against all other religions and atheism and pretty much science and everything else. Also, time itself had a beginning. The Bible said the same thing 3,000 years before. There was nothing, not anything at all, not anything of this natural universe. Then, the universe came into existence, very small, very hot, very dense, which was too small to see, and plus it didn't release light. The Bible said the exact same thing, and also said it was not visible. It came from what was not visible. Space-time fabric of the universe from that point, then it starts expanding following fixed laws. The Bible says the universe follows fixed laws. Now, these are multiple, clear, specific predictions of what science would only come to discover 3,000 years later. Those closest to the discoveries get it. Astronomer Sir Frederick Hoyle believed in an eternal universe when confronted with the evidence of a beginning. He ridiculed it as scientific genesis and called it the Big Bang in his disbelief, and the name stuck. Robert Jastrow, founder of NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies, said, the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts in Genesis is the same. Nobel Prize winner Penzias stated, the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. One of the best tests of the validity of a model is if it can predict future discoveries that no one should have known. I think that this is beyond humanity's ability to produce. But you have to make your own judgment, and it can be tested. If you don't think this is absolutely unprecedented and beyond humanity, then find other examples that match the multiple clear specific predictions given 3,000 years in advance of modern science. Anything less than a bunch of equivalent examples from all humanity is rush reasoning. And there should not be more, but there is. That line there represents the beginning or boundary. From that point, all natural things of the universe, matter, energy, space, all came into existence and started going off from there. And time came into existence. What does this tell us about the cause, along with space-time theorems? Well, it's on this side. The cause cannot be material as it created matter. It can't be part of space because it created space. It can't be anything that's part of this universe because all of nature, all of this closed system came into existence. So the cause is beyond that. If you are outside or beyond nature, that is transcendent by definition, or supernatural. Naturalism has already been shown to be inaccurate. He noted that metaphysical naturalism believes all this is all there is, universe is all there is, was, or ever will be, as Sagan said. But we already can see from this closed system came into existence, the cause is not part of it. It's already disproven. The cause is also outside of time, as time was created. And this puts the cause in another category. Philosophers and scientists have noted the need for an uncaused first cause. Because if the cause had a cause and had a cause and had a cause, you go back for infinity, and that's impossible. So, you need an uncaused first cause. But most just thought it was the universe, up until modern science. The cause has to be powerful, as the effect is not greater than this cause, and it happened one time in our universe, and the universe didn't do it, so it operates outside of natural laws. So the cause is transcendent, beyond our natural universe, immaterial, timeless, and uncaused first cause, powerful, and acts beyond the limits of the universe. That's what we all think of when we think of God. So this is not ad hoc, because these exact characteristics of God were given thousands of years prior to modern science discovering them. And not only predicted these specific properties, but again did so against all religions claiming that God part of the universe, and against science and atheism that said the universe is all there is, was, or ever will be in the closed system. Contemporary of Einstein, Arthur Eddington, said, "The beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural." Maybe supernatural matter or supernatural laws beyond our closed system was it, or a multiverse. Yeah, okay, might be. Well, then it's just there where I have the cause, but it still would also have a line and require a cause. As Borguth and Valentin spent 10 years and 5 papers trying to find out a way around the beginning, but just tightened the grip, so even a multiverse has a beginning and must meet all the properties. Okay, the third step in the evidence. We exist. We had a beginning. This beginning either had a personal agent involved, and it could have nature also, or it was just nature. Those are the only options. So now we'll go to fine-tuning evidence to discuss that. Modern science has found that there are things about our universe, from the initial conditions to the physical laws, to the constants and quantities and natures, that have all landed within the razor-thin range required for life. It's like a Goldilocks universe. And if, by chance, any one of these things was slightly more or slightly less, no life. As to why the universe is so vast, because it had to be. If the universe had a slightly higher mass or mass density, mass is a measure of how much matter is in the entire universe, then because of happenings in the early universe, the universe would only be composed of elements iron or heavier. We'd have a heavy metal universe, which is fine, I like Metallica, but there'd be no life. If this value was lower, then the universe would never be capable of producing elements heavier than helium. We'd have a hot air balloon universe and no life. Because you need carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, radioactive nuclides, you need all this stuff. It wouldn't exist if this was a little bit off one way or another. There are so many I could go through on every single size scale. We could go all the way down to subatomic particles of matter, like quarks. If features of the quarks or the atom aren't just right, no molecules, no stars, no life. This is well established in the scientific community. So here's a logical argument. The fine-tuning of the universe is either a result of physical necessity, it just had to be this way, chance, or design from a personal agent. It is not due to necessity. Science has already shown that, and I can go into that if we need. Does chance have a chance? Well, how precise is this fine-tuning recognized by science? One example, the dark energy or space energy density. This is the stuff that is in space-time fabric itself that stretches our universe out. If it differed by 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, we would not be here having this debate tonight. Here is an equivalent comparison, because I know that number is crazy. Here's an equivalent comparison. Looking at the back of a Mega Millions lotto card, I calculated the odds of winning the lottery if you buy one ticket. So what if someone bought one ticket and won? Well, someone had to win, so that's no big deal. But what if they got greedy? And then the next time the Mega Millions came around, they bought one ticket and they won again. Let's say that greedy little guy ends up doing this 14 times in a row, buying one ticket each time and winning each time. What are all of you thinking? Just what do you think? How lucky? No. Or something going on behind it all. The odds of nature, by chance, landing on the right value just for the dark energy has less of a chance than one person winning the Mega Millions 14 straight times. Betting your life and potential afterlife on the hope that fine-tuning isn't by an intelligent personal agent is a very bad bet. Fine-tuning is a common understanding in science. In fact, this argument is so strong, you'll see people trying to do things that are otherwise very odd. Like saying, well, you can't trust the numbers or the data. That's well established in the literature. But rushed reasoning away the data that keeps raining down does not stop the flood because we have trends. Trends are very significant indicators. Every month or so, a new fine-tuning is discovered, published, and makes it that much less likely unguided chance can be a sufficient cause. In fact, after eliminating all the other options, chance proponent Stephen Hawking admits our universe and laws appear to have a design that is both tailor-made to support us and, if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration. And I could go on and on with quotes from the scientists involved, but I don't want to quote mine Hawking because he entirely recognizes the fine-tuning for life and what it means about an intelligent agent, but rejects God and gives the no God option that you have left. We have an infinite number of other universes, and we happen to be in just the right one that got everything right. Now you talk about extravagant unparsimony. He's saying that every one of you out here, there's another you who is exactly like you in every way, where you live, how you've done your whole life up to this point, but they just decided to wear a different shirt today. And that is in an equally real universe somewhere out there in the infinite universe. Another well-known, which is why you can see this picture, every little different thing that could happen in life, there is another you out there, and it's an equally real universe. That is the other no-God option left with fine-tuning. Another well-known cosmologist, Bernard Carl, echoes that realization. If there is only one universe, you might have to have a fine-tuner. If you don't want God, you better have a multiverse. And not just a level 1 or 2 multiverse, which is fine for my argument. There's a good chance of that. But you need an infinite multiverse, like I talked about. You either have to believe there's a personal agent involved or there's an infinite other yous out there. And then, there is the evidence coming out in scientific articles all the time. I'll just give you one that I just saw just recently. German and Japanese scientists and engineers, through massive funding, intelligence, and effort, have used the world's 4th largest supercomputer K-array to simulate 1 second of brain activity, which took those 83,000 supercomputers 40 minutes to do. Not simulating consciousness, emotion, or any of the good stuff, just the activity. But that's an amazing accomplishment. You can do a napkin calculation comparing just the efficiency of the K-array against the human brain. Assuming the supercomputer array can operate without failure for 70 years, and very generously assuming the space containing the array is only 83,000 times larger than the brain, you discover that whatever led to the cause of the brain, either a personal agent with nature or just nature all by itself, is 440 quadrillion times more intelligent and better funded than the German and Japanese scientists and engineers who created the K supercomputer array. Articles are endless. If you're going to cheat on an exam, you don't look to a rock or an SEC football player to get answers. You look to something more intelligent. How come we're going to nature endlessly to copy it if there's not intelligence involved? If that predicted cause of the universe had purposeful design for our conscious life with the ability to have free will and love, is it reasonable to think that that creator just went away? Or is it more likely there will be further purpose shown? The same Bible that predicted the beginning and cause stated that the personal cause provided further personal revelation in Jesus and demonstrated he understands the situation, that our situation is very serious if the cross is what was required, our inherent value, because value is determined by what one is willing to pay, and Jesus paid the full price. And to verify the claims of something beyond life with the resurrection, since this is beyond our natural experiences. That's how you validate. Miracles are clustered around certain individuals like that. Every peer-reviewed book or article written by one with a terminal degree, a PhD, that concerned the resurrection in German, French, or English from 1975 to today has been reviewed and cataloged for what they accepted as fact, based on the evidences. Here are four of those facts that the vast majority of scholars grant as a starting point for us to chew on. Jesus died by crucifixion. Fact 2, Jesus' tomb was empty. Fact 3, the followers of Jesus sincerely believed he rose from the dead and appeared to them. And fact 4, the sudden conversion of the church persecutor Paul. Something happened to make you the most significant figure in all history, and it may impact you ultimately. We have enough evidence to perform the scholarship to accept those facts. The resurrection explains them perfectly. If you disagree, okay, that's fine. But what evidence do you provide to make us question the scholarship accepts as fact? And what natural explanation do you provide that better fits the facts? Anything less is rush reasoning. Finally, free will. Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of the helical structure of DNA, accurately in line with the no-God belief, notes that you, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity, and your free will are no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Basically, if there's a natural explanation for everything, then initial conditions and natural laws is all there is and entirely determines all you are and do. You have no free will. Crick, Michael Roos, Stephen Hawking, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, Alex Rosenberg, Jerry Coyne, Sam Harris, etc., the full realm of atheists in biology, physics, philosophy, psychology recognize we are meat robots. We have no more control than an open can of pop fizzing, as we are just a collection of molecules in motion described by natural laws. Do you believe that your choice of what to wear, who to date, or what to believe is entirely determined? If you don't, you cannot stand on atheism. Let's do a summary. The biggest questions in life, where did it all come from? Bible, 3,000 years before modern science, called the beginning and cause out in a predictive model that's been validated. Atheism, science, and everything else basically said, oh, it's an eternal universe up until modern science. They're wrong. Then they said, well, the universe is the uncaused first cause. Again, wrong. It had a beginning. It requires a cause. Naturalism is already disproven, because if you have your closed system and the whole closed system came into existence, you've got to have something outside that closed system to create it. And we know that the cause is transcendent. So what atheists have to tell us? What is the cause, and tell us why? Then we have the fine-tuning. Bottom line, you either have a personal agent or an infinite multiverse. What is the more simple? Infinite multiverse, I don't have enough faith to believe that. Then you have to have the facts that scholarship gives. You either have better evidence to knock down all the facts that scholarship accepts, and you have to give a natural model that better fits the facts. Free will. Are we determined? Is there no free will? Do you believe what you do, date who you do, just because natural laws describe you? That's where atheism is. And the atheists say, if you're an atheist and don't believe that, you're deluded and you're not being intellectually honest.
So first of all, I was interested to hear that Scott argues that the Bible got the Big Bang model right several thousand years before science did, right? I found that particularly surprising that this creation model, this creation out of nothing doctrine, because it actually runs contrary to the biblical narrative. In the Oxford Bible Commentary, biblical scholar and specialist in Hebrew studies, R. Noman Rybre, writes, quote, Genesis 1:2 refers to a situation before God's creative action. There's no question here of a creation ex nihilo, a creation out of nothing. The earth already existed, but it was a formless void, not a kind of non-existence, but something empty and formless, without light and covered by the waters of the deep. So the Bible doesn't predict coming into being out of nothing. The Bible's talking about God forming the world out of pre-existing formless void of deep water. I don't know what that means, but this was a common cosmological theme when it comes to the Near East cosmologies and the ancient religions of that time and place. So no, the Bible does not actually teach creation out of nothing. Now, in his opening statement, Mr. Symington provided us with three arguments for the existence of God. Let's examine those three in the order that they were presented. So the Kalam cosmological argument is the first argument he presented, if you recall. It starts roughly formulated. It's whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And this cause, of course, must be transcendent, right? Now, first notice that this argument, if successful, doesn't actually get you to the Christian God. Secondly, Scott seems to be claiming in support of premise 2 that science suggests or proves that the universe had an absolute beginning, that it popped into being out of nothing, and then Scott philosophically infers that the universe requires God as an immaterial, supernatural cause, because after all, everything needs a cause, right? But of course, even if science did say that the universe had an absolute beginning, how does positing a powerful person explain anything? Ladies and gentlemen, to claim that a log cabin popped into being out of nothing would be very strange, of course. It would be very bizarre. But notice that positing a lumberjack who supposedly created this log cabin without any logs or without any building materials whatsoever, notice that positing this lumberjack doesn't actually make it any less strange. You still have something coming into being out of absolutely nothing. Positing a person doing this doesn't actually explain anything. It doesn't make it any less weird. Thirdly, while it is entirely appropriate to talk about causes and effects within the universe of objects and of events, it's not at all clear that these words are even remotely applicable to the universe itself at a fundamental level. There is just too much that we do not understand about the early universe. Besides, the cosmological models that real theoretical physicists are actually working on that are using to describe the universe, there's plenty of them that are self-contained. They don't require a God. God is not necessary for these models. And not all of them have the universe beginning to exist. Some of them are eternal into the past. So to suggest that science is unanimous, that the universe popped into being out of nothing, it's a profound unfamiliarity with the models that are actually out there being discussed. As theoretical physicist at Caltech Sean Carroll writes, the singularity at the Big Bang does not indicate a beginning to the universe, only an end to our theoretical comprehension. And the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin theorem that he appealed to does not actually show that the universe had a beginning. It shows that our ability to describe the history of the universe with our classical physics ends at a certain point. And that may mean that the universe had a beginning. It also may mean that this is where quantum issues come into play. We just don't know. And of course, that theorem is only as good as its assumptions. So the fine-tuning argument. This argument, I think, is interesting, but the problem with it, I think, is that it assumes that a universe whose constants are within narrow life-permitting range begs for an explanation instead of mere chance. So while, say, a hypothetical universe whose constants were in a narrow range that were required for an absolute collapse of the universe immediately, or for a maximum number of black holes, I would assume that if we saw a universe that seemed to be fine-tuned for the maximum number of black holes, Scott wouldn't think that this would require a designer, right? It seems that what's being suggested here is that humans, that there's something special about humans. But of course, as I presented in my opening statement, under metaphysical naturalism, there's no reason to think that. The only time you get special humans is if we're thinking within theistic frameworks. So in a sense, it's a kind of begging the question in this issue. As philosopher Neil Manson writes, yet for the design hypothesis to explain the existence of a universe finely tuned for life, the value judgment that life is good had to be true at a time when, or if one prefers, in a situation where there were no rational agents in the universe, unquote. So if a brute moral proposition existing in some sense prior to the constants actually being what they are strikes you as implausible as it strikes me, then I think you should join me in rejecting this fine-tuning argument, because the argument requires such a view. Secondly, even if the general observation of fine-tuning is more probable on the Christian God hypothesis than on metaphysical naturalism, that's not the whole story. When we take on more specific facts, like the hostility to life of the universe, the vast majority of the universe, as I argued in my opening, which is far more likely on metaphysical naturalism than on the Christian God hypothesis, it is far from obvious that the observations taken as a group that relate to the fine-tuning issues could even remotely favor the Christian God hypothesis. Thirdly, the Christian God is all-powerful. He can do anything that is logically possible, so we're told. Now, if he can do anything that's logically possible, he can create and sustain life in any universe, and under any possible combination of cosmological constants. So observations of apparent fine-tuning are highly unlikely and surprising on the assumption that the Christian God hypothesis is true. Now, of course, they're highly unlikely on the assumption that the Christian God hypothesis is true, because it would be suggesting that God is pretending to be limited by the laws of physics rather than being their very author. So as far as I'm concerned, this is heresy. Now, rather than being evidence for God, observations of apparent fine-tuning actually constitute fairly strong evidence against God, because this is extremely unlikely under the assumption that the Christian God exists. And that's what evidence means. Now, the resurrection argument. He talks about how, if God, assuming the fine-tuning argument works, if God cares about us that much, we would expect him to reveal himself in something like Jesus. And that Jesus is very valuable, right, because he paid the ultimate price. But I'm sorry, having a bad weekend for our sins isn't a full price. In Christian theology, the unbeliever goes to hell for eternity. 3 days, I'm sorry, that's barely a sacrifice. And so it's actually, when it comes to the hypothesis that he's trying to posit here to explain these facts, it's not at all obvious how this is supposed to explain. Notice that the God raised Jesus from the dead hypothesis, along with our background knowledge, doesn't actually predict any of the historical claims that we're talking about. Not unless you want to pack it with a whole bunch of additional assumptions that lack independent confirmation. Alternative hypothesis, the body was stolen. We have independent archaeological evidence that suggests that tomb robbery in first century Palestine specifically was actually a very widespread problem. And so it's not at all unlikely, given our background knowledge, that the tomb would end up empty. And given Jewish beliefs at the time, it's not at all unlikely that them going through emotional turmoil after losing their leader. Oh, all right.
I appreciate Justin's thoughts on these issues and see that we think similarly in a number of ways. But notice the component that runs through each of his arguments: speculation and subjective complaints to such a high degree that the corresponding uncertainty bars bind the arguments. Regarding non-resistant unbelievers, every unbeliever of one thing is a true believer and follower of something else. If you don't believe in the biblical God, then you believe in atheism, agnosticism, Buddhism, or something else. And people settle into these beliefs that they are comfortable with and want. This state is not one of aimless openness or wandering like just in pictures, but there is a momentum involved. That is a resistance in everyone. We want to stay where we are comfortable, where we want to be. However, the non-resistant unbelievers that just in pictures are not non-existent, but more accurately are like virtual particles that fluctuate into and out of existence. For one to exist, a person has to not be comfortable with or dislike their current belief enough so the momentum slows to a stop. Then the resistance is gone and the non-resistant unbelievers comes into existence for a brief time and then settles back into the momentum of a believer. Either because that non-resistant unbeliever truly seeks and finds God, who is there waiting as poignantly shown in the prodigal son, or chooses that they do not want the relationship that God offers and returns to a belief in something else with a corresponding momentum. Therefore, both premises go nowhere because his concept of a non-resistant unbeliever is inaccurate. Is he going to argue that God should or should be able to secure belief in that kind of unbeliever? If so, then we're eliminating free will and ignoring the possibility of human judgment error, which is one of the most predictive of human behaviors. The existence of a bunch of skeptics is not proof that the beliefs of the skeptic holds are true. I could go into a bunch more, like even if the whole world rejected God, that is their free and subjective choice. It has nothing to do with to change the fact of objective existence. I really want to believe that U of M never lost a game. They just ran out of time. But even if all of Chrysler Arena believed that, that would not change the objective parameters of how we measure sports success. The scoreboard. And with all the subjective arguments that Justin or others provide, Christians can always point to the beginning of the universe scoreboard, the cause, fine-tuning, resurrection scoreboard. Now, science will always say keep the door open for possibilities and other options are always possible. But based on the objective evidence, they're not reasonable. Just as it got a point with the hostility of the universe to life, unfortunately, that point is at the end of a personal designer fine-tuning argument sword that is eviscerating atheism. Atheists used to argue that there will be life all over, so we aren't special creation of God. I had no problem with life elsewhere. The Bible says nothing either way. But now that Stanger, Krauss, and the cosmological community have been coming to realize there is not life all over, but almost certainly only here, now the argument goes, why such a vast universe if we're so special? Why confined to this little crib on Earth? I hope you see that atheists are arguing against God no matter where the evidence goes. That is a resistant unbeliever. Who gets confined to a crib? Babies. Those too immature to go elsewhere as we get distracted enough on Earth to ignore the bigger questions in life. Premise 1 spotlights the speculation you must make. This is how God should have done things. And he said, oh, we can't really speculate. Well, if you say that you can know enough about the universe that you can say how God should have created it, should God have just made a single solar system? What if the Creator is creative? What if the Creator wants to show vast beauty? It's interesting that we're placed in the right time and position and location in the universe to see the entire beauty and history of the universe and provide me with so much objective evidence for God. Even more amazing, the universe is just as vast and just as old as it needs to be for our life on our lonely planet. I gave the mass density example in my opening regarding the vastness. The universe must also be as old as it is for numerous reasons permitting life. For example, you need 3 generations of stars to cook up the elements necessary for life. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, the radioisotopes. That takes about 9 billion years. I could go over about 20 different other time windows that all have to line up for human life. Here's one more that takes 4.5 billion years that takes us right to when humans came on the scene. Plate tectonics reached 29% continental landmass right at that time, which is optimal for maximum nutrients recycled appropriately and the maximum food production in oceans and land for human population. His premise, too, is also false. Because on naturalism, no life is vastly more likely than life and life in just one spot constitutes a miracle. Therefore, his argument just supports fine-tuning. As astronomer Hugh Ross observes, where else do intelligent agents spend massive time and resources? On a wedding.
We realize those 20 minutes have extremely high value and purpose for the bride and groom who are joining together, and it's the value in that 20 minutes that makes it worth the investment. Cosmologist Brandon Carter, not a Christian, just one who follows the evidence where it leads, said the only possible explanation is there must be somebody beyond the universe with an extremely high value and purpose for the human species. Regarding pointless suffering, first, given our historical and cognitive limitations, I think we're simply not in a position to say with any sort of confidence that the suffering we observe in the world is pointless or unnecessary. It would take a level of knowledge of the being that you're trying to disprove to sustain your burden of proof that it's pointless, and that there must be a better way. You are presuming these things can have no value to us or a loving God, but we do not have all the equations, much less all the variables, of impact, 10 years, 100 years, and an eternity. The movies It's a Wonderful Life, The Butterfly Effect, and especially Sliding Doors illustrate this well. If our linear accelerator goes down when treating a cancer patient, the person who has the answer would be the engineer who owns all the patents, who designed it and knows the intended purpose of each part. I am not going to listen to the presumptions of someone who just has some engineering experience. Second, I have examples of what anyone would call pointless suffering, which led to untold good. The mother who had her son killed by a drunk driver and started mad, impacted countless others. We have likely examples in our life. My dog having instruments shoved in uncomfortable orifices, I'm sure, was perceived by him as apparently pointless suffering. But the momentary pain has value he is unaware of. He's not on our level. And he still trusts me. Not to minimize suffering, no words can change what one experiences and feels, but if the biblical God exists, then it will be as momentary as when in eternity. Third, it seems many assume none of the possible quote-unquote pointless instances of suffering have been stopped by a loving God. I think it is much more likely that countless instances have been stopped, we're just unaware of. I have evidence in my life that I'm certain of, but it is subjective, so I won't bring it up for you. But we just can't bring up instances, we can't bring up those ones that we don't know if they've been stopped. So we have uncertainty now, times uncertainty. There is so much uncertainty involved in this argument. Biblically, I'm inclined even to possibly say pointless suffering that's left is just as likely under theism as atheism. If God wanted a relationship with us as we have with goldfish, then his first premise of the argument has weight, as God's primary goal would be to keep us comfortable. But we don't believe in that God. The biblical God, like a good parent, wants something much more profound, a relationship of love and trust. Love and trust don't come in a vacuum. Parents have 18 years to build that. So how do you accomplish that? God creates a limited three-dimensional space and time where free will can operate for a time. And we can learn to either trust his way or go another way. Most suffering in my life are due to jerks' choices, myself being one of the jerks. And the emotional pain from these bad choices is probably the worst type of our suffering. And possibly the fire extinguishers Eric and I stole and the firecrackers we threw in the big kid's bedroom at 4 a.m., much of it may not lead to greater good and truly be pointless. So pointless suffering may exist, it's not far from certain, but to not allow that removes free will. And to build trust, you have to give evil, and by that I mean any person, being, or choice against God's will, an almost free run. So that when it's all said and done, when the play is over and the author walks the stage, no person or angel will be able to claim God didn't really allow other ways of fair chance because he limited creation too much. As far as suffering caused by nature, the Bible notes God set up fixed laws in nature. This allows cause and effect to make life predictable so we can learn and allows the ability to reason. But the same water that nourishes can drown. The same neural pathways that transmit pleasure and warn of dangers also transmit pain. The same plate tectonics that are suitable for land features provide earthquakes. Humans have observed this too. We set up a biodome to see how people could live in that before they go off to Mars in a different environment. To get the full learning, you can't step in when natural suffering arises. As Lee Strobel notes, God's ultimate answer to suffering isn't an explanation, it's the incarnation of Jesus. Suffering is a personal problem that demands a personal response, and God isn't some distant, detached, disinterested deity. He entered our world and personally experienced our pain and validated his solution.
All right, so Scott expresses some concern about atheism and naturalism and its effect on our purpose in life and our ability to make free choices. And he says that there is no free will under naturalism. But of course, this ignores the fact that philosophers have recognized that there are a number of different conceptions of free will, and many of them are completely worth having and preserve many of our intuitions that we do want out of our understanding of free will. There is a compatibilist view of free will, which says that free choices are compatible with a deterministic universe, and that when it comes to purpose, yes, I would agree with Scott that we don't have an objective purpose in the sense of a kind of universal top-down purpose where we are created for some external purpose. I fully agree that under naturalism no such thing exists. But of course that doesn't mean that no purpose exists whatsoever. We all have purpose in our lives. We all have goals that we aspire to. We all have families that we care about. And a lot of the times our purpose is that we care about our family, or that we pursue education, or a number of different very virtuous goals that we can pursue. Now, of course, according to what it means for a person to have objective purpose, according to Scott, that is, that we have an external person creating us for a particular reason. Under that understanding of what it means to have a purpose, God's life is completely purposeless. God has no purpose. God was not created for any purpose. So if I should be sad or something, that I have no purpose in my life, no objective, top-down purpose, then so much the worse for his deity. He must have a very sad life. I don't see it. Okay, so when it comes to hiddenness, I'm afraid that this argument was just misunderstood. It's not saying that what Scott replied was that when it comes to non-resistant non-belief, I'm using hiddenness in the same way here, I'm referring to the same argument here. Scott is suggesting that there are no such thing as non-resistant non-believers, and he appeals to the well-known issues of selection bias, that we generally tend to look for evidence that already supports our pre-existing beliefs. That's all very true. But of course, it's one thing to draw on this evidentiary basis and say that that the vast majority of people are going to have this tendency. But it's another thing to extrapolate from that to say that there was no person ever that genuinely and open-mindedly didn't believe in the Christian God. If you really want to say that, if you really want to make these assertions about the kind of cognitive attitude about every person who has not believed in the exact way that you believe, well, I'm sorry, I find that profoundly arrogant. I would never say such a thing. I think that there are very many open-minded Christians that believe as they do, but that would in principle, be open to new evidence and would adjust their beliefs accordingly. I would never say that, make that assumption about a whole category of persons. I find his rejection of that premise to be just profound. I can't, I honestly don't know what to say to that. Now, when it comes to the hostility to the universe, he seemed to be suggesting that I was making an argument from scale, that the universe is so big and that we are so small. But that's not what the argument is. The argument is about the hostility to life in the vast majority of the universe. Which, again, is something entirely surprising under the Christian God hypothesis. Now, he seems to be suggesting that we are not in a position to talk about what we can find to be surprising or expected on certain hypotheses. But as I gave in my kind of warning against this God is mysterious response, this has pretty uncomfortable implications, and I'll get to those shortly. When it comes to, regarding the hostility of the universe, he also replied with just kind of reasserting his fine-tuning in first cause argument. But of course, he didn't actually deal with my objections to these arguments. He just repeated his conclusions. So I don't particularly think that he's dealt with either of these arguments. Now, when it comes to suffering, the seemingly gratuitous or pointless suffering, He says that we can't place probabilities on this. He's using the same kind of approach as he did in the last argument, appealing to a God as mysterious response. This in the literature is called a kind of skeptical theism. In the last 10 years or so, there's been a whole slew of papers on this kind of issue, or this kind of trying to avoid the evidential problem of suffering by appealing to the mystery of God, and that there is a whole swath of problems that this unpacks for theism, and we'll discuss those in the next section of the debate. And he appeals to free will, saying that, like, look, free will is such a good thing. Of course we're going to have some suffering. But let me ask you, if you're walking around, downtown somewhere, and you see someone beating their child, or, beating an elderly person or something, and you're walking around and you witness this, and you do nothing and someone asks you why, and you're like, well, I didn't want to violate his free will, see? You're guilty of something, aren't you? Don't we all find that to be just gross negligence? I'm sorry, but God saying, hands off, because of all these people raping over here, they need to have their free will preserved. You've got to be kidding me. This is supposed to be a moral worldview? This is supposed to be a perfectly loving being? I'm sorry, my intuitions are being violated in the most gratuitous way about what it means to be moral. If that's moral, then ladies and gentlemen, I have no idea what those words mean anymore. Now, when it comes to, and so he's talking, in regards to natural suffering and earthquakes and plate tectonics and things like this, and he's talking about, look, the earth needs to be a certain way, you need to have plate tectonics, and because of that, you're going to have earthquakes, right? Again, this is assuming that God, being all-powerful, is subject and only capable of working within the already existing laws of physics, rather than being their author. This misunderstands the argument. I'm not suggesting that if God was a weak God who was just kind of thrown into this situation and was like, hey man, do what you can with these laws of physics. No, that's not what's going on here. That's not what Christian theism is positing. Christian theism is saying that God is all-powerful and that he can do anything that is logically possible, and this entails that he can make the laws of physics any way he wants. So he could have you could have your world without plate tectonics, or he could have plate tectonics that just don't lead to earthquakes. You could have different climate systems that don't lead to tornadoes. But that's not what we see, is it? We have vast amounts of suffering, people losing their homes, their children, and they're calling on God and he's not answering. This is real suffering. To dismiss this because God likes plate tectonics? I'm sorry, this is not a legitimate answer to any of these questions. And of course, actually, I think I've said what I need to say. Thank you very much.
Does Justin really expect to understand a being as distinct as God? That lack of humility is tremendous. To understand, does he think he can come fix my linear accelerator because of his experience with his computer? Also, he completely, with the pain and everything, ignored the fact that I said, aside from that not being able to know, you also got to set the stage where you can learn if God's way is really right or not. So you got to allow some kind of free run, kind of like the biodome example didn't answer that. He says you got to just change things in nature, like change plate tectonics. Seriously? Do you know what kind of repercussions that shakes the rest of the world with changing something in nature? And even if you change that, someone's going to complain about the next thing. Well, you didn't fix this, murder. Okay, well then he fixes murder, but then there's no free will. So to just say flippantly, we can make changes, he can do something different, is just a lack of understanding. Now, as far as Jesus, notice he entirely skipped dealing with the scholarship again. Here's the facts. He entirely skipped dealing with it, saying that, well, I do have one alternative, the body was stolen. But when you notice, he says, well, two were getting robbed around that time. What was his evidence that Jesus' body was stolen? And that theory completely violates number 3 and 4. Jesus' followers sincerely believe he raised from the dead. They have group hallucinations. You can have group hallucinations if a bunch of Marines get starved or don't sleep for a while. but they all see different things. One sees an octopus, one sees a Nazi. You don't have them all seeing the same thing and then be willing to die for it. Give me one example in the entire history of DSM psychology where that happened. Also, doesn't explain Paul. Paul didn't want to see Jesus. He was going after Christians. So, let's see. So Christianity's answers fits these facts better than any naturalist explanation. You can check for yourself and see if any naturalist explanation fits better. Hallucination, coma, these naturalistic theories, not many are holding on to anymore. They've become litter on the naturalist foundation. As far as the beginning, Justin even tries saying, oh, there's models that don't have a beginning. Yeah, the bottom line is, show me the model then, show me the evidence. All of the evidence is on the side that there's a beginning. Melanchthon said, if an argument is what convinces reasonable people, and the proof is what convinces even unreasonable people, with the proof now in place, cosmologists have to deal with the problem of a beginning. All of the evidence. The most recent article in the news, they found gravity waves. Points right to the beginning again. Secondly, did Justin give us any examples? If the Bible's not special, give me other examples that made 10 different, specific, multiple, clear predictions 3,000 years advanced in modern science. If it's not something special, but in humanity, show me some examples. We didn't get that. He tries to say, he brought up some Hebrew scholar, which is fine, but that Hebrew scholar goes against the creation ex nihilo, out of nothing, that Christians have believed in as a standard. And let me tell you what Genesis 1:1 says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth are shining and rest. But that's a compound word. It's like butterfly. It doesn't mean butter or fly. It doesn't mean heavens or earth. When you put the two together like that in Hebrew, it means absolutely all natural things in the universe. Then after that, after a planet was actually in existence, then he hovered over the surface and did things. That's an inaccurate reading that he provided from Genesis. And if you guys, he tries to say it's a copy from Near East, go ahead, get Epic of Gilgamesh, read for yourself. Don't take my word or his word. See Epic of Gilgamesh, even read the Greeks, read what people are saying about how the universe began, and compare it with the Bible. As far as the beginning and the cause, let's just show you. So Justin goes to, well, there could be some natural cause. Here's why it's not going to be a natural cause. There was no nature. This is a logical incoherence. If you say X creates Y, you presuppose the existence of X to create Y. If you say X creates X, you presuppose the existence of X to create itself. That's like you giving birth to your parents. It's logically incoherent. So something in this nature, I showed a video from a professor who what science knows is whatever created this came out of something that was beyond nature. So naturalism is disprovable. We can keep going and show you. Maybe it's some type of extra type of matter, like outside of nature, supernatural matter, or hypermatter. Okay, but here's the problem. The nature of nature is ceaselessly changing due to quantum theory. Now, if you're ceaselessly changing and you're some type of supermatter, then if you exist in another time dimension and you existed for an eternity, everything would have been done by now. It reaches what cosmologists call heat death, where you have nothing happening. You used up all your change, all your instability. It's done. The most you can have is a cold expansion with nothing there, no star shining. We have stars shining, so that's not a possibility. The other thing you could say, well, maybe there's a supernatural type of matter or hypermatter. You won't want to use supernatural, but I can show where others have it. Maybe it existed in a timeless state, like God. Okay, that's fine. But the problem is this. To ceaselessly change, you have nature working on natural laws. And they need time to do anything. If you're in a time, I can give you the radioactivity equation. And in it, you have time. If time is 0, doesn't change, then nothing changes. You have A equals A. So if this was in a timeless state, nothing happens. So, and like I said, if I was standing on the no-God hypothesis, I wouldn't want to use supernatural either. However, as Eddington, Jastrow, and others have said, The world began abruptly in an act of creation. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. So if it can't be a natural cause or even the supernatural stuff, because we'd either be at heat death, which we're not, or it's just as timeless and it can't do anything, in the scientific and philosophical literature, there's only two options left that can exist timelessly, changelessly, and possibly be a cause: an immaterial mind or an abstract object. This is why Stephen Hawking has gone to quantum gravity, a law. The problem is, abstract objects, by definition, don't cause anything. Not just in this physical universe, that's a metaphysical principle. They don't cause anything. As Oxford mathematician John Lennox stated, the laws of arithmetic never added anything to my bank account, and neither will the laws of physics. So that's what we're left with. Oh, and on the other side of personal agency, we have all these things. Fine-tuning. He's, let's see. Notice again, he goes against the scientific understanding of fine-tuning. This is well established. Yet he goes against it. He doesn't answer how you can beat all these odds like a lotto, or he doesn't explain how he gets something like the brain. And he said there's no need to say humans are special. That's not the argument. The argument was, is it necessity, chance, or personal design? The fact that you have all these, picture a locker like a safe, and you have all these little dials on it. You have thousands of dials, and they all have thousands of numbers you can turn to. If all of them are exactly where they need to be, is it necessity, chance, or purposeful design? This is why people are saying, all right, if you don't want a personal agency, you're going to have to say an infinite multiverse. That's all you have left. And also, there's a misconception of this almighty. Almighty to me, I don't. He thinks he can understand a being as distinct as God and know how he should do things. If I could understand everything about God, then I would think he's a man-made God. So to say that we should be able to understand everything is a real lack of humility. Right? Oh, and he said, I don't understand the science around the beginning. Well, I could agree with him, but we'd both be wrong. The evidence is all on the side of the beginning and the cause, exactly as the Bible described. Let's see. So you see a trend. Justin is willing to go against the well-established scientific or historic understanding, but he doesn't bring better evidence. And if fine-tuning isn't what it's supposed to be, how does it lead us to new discoveries? We noticed that the moon was larger than it was supposed to be. They said, I wonder if that has any impact on why we have human life. They found out if it wasn't just that extra large size, it wouldn't have slowed down the rotation rate enough for humans to live. So we have these continuous trends. Free will. Natural causes are described by initial conditions and natural laws, and they entirely determine your life. I didn't hear anything except him trying to explain that, well, there's these other kinds of free will things that are philosophical you can feel happy with, but they don't exist.
Okay, so this is, I think, the exciting part, where there's going to be cross-examination, and I think we're starting with Scott in the hot seat being cross-examined by Justin. Is that right? Okay, so that'll go on for 8 minutes, starting whenever you're ready.
Are you all set?
I should. Here, you can take this.
Okay, yeah.
Here we go. Okay, so for the evidential argument from pointless suffering, I raised that there are a number, an almost inconceivable number, of instances of suffering that seem like that if God existed, he'd have no justification for allowing these. And you seem to be suggesting that we're not really in a position to make that kind of argument because, for all we know, God has reasons beyond our understanding. Is that correct?
No, the first part is you would have to know all the equations and variables so you know what the final answer is going to be to say if this is actually an overall good thing or not. It could be 10 years, 100 years down the line, and an eternity. I think if there's a tsunami, God's going to deal with each person fairly on an individual basis. So I don't think that we can just, blanket statement say that, we can know all these variables and make a judgment. But that was part of it. The other part was I said, if God wants to, if he's going to give us a chance to have love and trust, we have to know that his way is something that we would choose versus other options. So he could give free will to the level and even natural order with cause and effect, so that give them a free run, so that none of us when we get to heaven or heaven, or if we, or even the angels that are there can say, you know what, God, you didn't let the stage be right, so how do we know your plan's really the best?
Okay, sure. So the first part of that, I mean, we're not really in a position to, say whether or not God might have a justification because, there's events that are just, like the butterfly effect you referred to, where, for all we know, this sets a whole chain of causation that leads to some great good. That's great. So what I'm interested in is whether or not we're in a position to place probabilities on whether or not, because again, this butterfly effect humility that we need to start embracing now, whether or not we're in a position to place probabilities on whether or not God has a morally sufficient reasons to lie to us in the Bible. Do you think we're in a position to place probabilities on that?
I don't think we can say 100% certain that God didn't lie.
Okay.
However, are you adopted?
No.
Well, actually,
I can't say that for certainty. Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, I met your parents before we came up here, and I was remarking where you got your eyes and your face structure from. And both your parents started laughing, and they said, well, he's actually adopted. We just haven't told him that, but we kind of want to see if he figures it out before he gets 40. Do you think that your parents, do you think they're lying? I mean,
no. Okay. So here's the reason why that's a trivial question. So what I'm suggesting here is that God, because he's so great, and because his mind is so much greater than ours, and we can only attempt to understand it. So remember, the argument I was presenting here was a likelihood argument. It dealt with probabilities, right? I never claimed certainty. I just said that these things are strongly supportive of metaphysical naturalism over Christian theism. So what I'm suggesting is that if we're to take the humility that you're suggesting, we are in no position to place probabilities on whether or not God has a morally sufficient reason to lie to us in the Bible. And if that's the case, we're in no position to actually place probabilities on the truth value of these biblical claims.
Well, that's a possible claim, but it's not reasonable.
Well, I'm suggesting it's possible.
Do you think that because it's possible your parents lied to you about not being adopted, do you think that's reasonable? Are you going to base your life on it?
No, because
God has given me just, it's a subjective thing, but he's given me enough. I mean, shoot, anyone who dies for me, that's a big thing.
Okay, right, but that would be begging the question against the argument, right? Because I'm suggesting that he might be lying. So the issue is, the reason why the parent adoption thing you're bringing about, why that's completely disanalogous to what I'm actually trying to say here, is that humans are not like God, right? We have a fairly decent understanding of the kinds of reasons that motivate humans. If we don't have that same thing with God, then we aren't in a position to place probabilities on God and whether he's actually lying to us in the Bible. I'm saying that I am in a position to place probabilities on whether or not my parents are being truthful when they're telling me that I'm not adopted, because I can make inductive inferences that they're fairly truthful people. With God, you can only do that by begging the question. Isn't that right?
Begging the question?
By assuming he's telling the truth to rebut the argument that I'm suggesting is lying.
I understand begging the question kind of, but when you use it, it kind of went over my head, so you might have to dumb it down a little bit. But even if it's not disanalogous to the whole thing with your parents. I mean, there's certain things that you go through in life. You can say you don't have any. I can say I do. It's both subjective. So I've got more than enough reasons to trust this being. Now, if all of a sudden I get there and he's like, oh man, I did all this stuff. I played you. I totally played you. You bought into that. Well, I mean, what am I going to do? I did what I thought was most reasonable, but I just don't see what on earth what on earth reason would God have to do something like that? That makes no sense why he would do that.
And I would say the same thing about his allowing people to torture and rape each other. Are you kidding me? I'm suggesting that God doesn't have morally permissible reasons to allow this bullshit to happen. And you're telling me you can't think of a reason why he might tell a lie to you about a guy raising from the dead a few thousand years ago?
Well, you can get emotional and point the finger at God and say
I'm
he allows torture and rape and so on. And you can try to give some examples. I've seen some shallow attempts at it. But, if you want to sit in God's lap to slap him in the face, as Morgan Freeman in Batman said to the criminal who went after Batman.
Actually, that was theologian Cornelius Van
Good
Til.
luck with that.
Okay, how much time do I have? Oh, okay. Okay, so you're suggesting that God is the cause of the universe, and the reason why this concerns me is that because every time we understand intentional agents as causation, intentional agents only are capable of intentional action within pre-existing time. So I'm wondering if you could unpack how that inference could possibly work. Because it seems to me that it requires at least 3 temporally distinct moments: desiring to do something, acting to do something, and then actually doing that thing. And if only doing that thing brings about time, then how can we suggest that God is actually intentionally acting?
That argument is a category error. You're comparing a being outside. It's a category error, the whole thing. If you're comparing a being who is us who are inside of time, where we are changing choices and so on, you're comparing that to a being that Christianity has always claimed was in a point where, if you're in a timeless state, a changeless state, if you know all things eternally, then you don't have a time sequence of mental states. You just know these things. And this is what Christians have always believed about God. For example, I'll try to simplify it.
And I'm just suggesting it's incoherent. That's all I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I'm suggesting that's not accurate. Because for example, if God always, in a changeless state, he always knew. Let's just say he was sitting down. No, that's okay. That's all right. Okay, so. Oh, I thought I took your water.
Oh, no.
Sorry. So we're now going to have 8 minutes of Scott cross-examining Justin. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. If you died and found yourself standing before God, how will you respond?
I would say, man, I hope you are not the vindictive, bloodthirsty God of the Bible.
Okay.
But if you are, sorry?
That was nice. I like that. Okay. That was really, I love that part. However, what you've just proven to all of us here is you are not thinking about God intellectually, you're acting on emotion. If you're standing before an almighty God who you rejected, you're not going to be talking trash with God. You're going to be in abject terror. That is the rational response. You just showed that you're acting completely on emotion on this issue.
I don't consider moral decision-making to be emotion. I consider my recognition of the bloodthirstiness of Yahweh to be a completely rational and carefully minded decision and conclusion. Right. I don't consider that an emotional response.
I don't know if you got all your parameters, if you're actually telling everyone, all the full parameters. If you talk about the Canaanites, see, he complains when God doesn't stop evil, and then he complains when he does. The Canaanites who the Israelites went and nailed, they slaughtered them according to the Bible. God gave the Canaanites 400 years to stop the stuff that they were doing. What were they doing? They were worshiping Molech. Molech was this giant statue of metal of a bull where he had fire coming out of his belly, and they put children, not just infants, up to about 4 years old, into the hands and roasted them alive often enough where they had bands that would play all the time so everyone else didn't have to hear the screaming. So if you complain when God doesn't stop stuff, and then you complain when He does, to me that it just exposes atheist views.
Well, the problem I have with that, though, is that God commanded that in response to this child sacrifice, that the Israelites kill the men, women, and children. So you get mad at them for child sacrifice, and then you say, kill all the children. That's a response that we should think is irrational?
Well, that could be an idiom, and the other thing it could be is
No, it's not literal
Well,
anymore.
you can laugh if you want. I mean, I know you're into the emotion part of it. But, all right. Your cause. What natural cause caused the universe?
Oh, I have no idea.
But you're
Cosmologists
willing
are
to
doing
go
science
against,
work.
you're willing to just, is it worth looking into the Bible more, considering it gave the only cause that actually fits the properties right now that modern science found? Are you willing to look into it more, maybe?
Considering the fact that Hebrew scholars generally don't agree that the Bible paints a creation ex nihilo picture, I first of all find that prediction to be completely underwhelming.
Well, like I said before, you guys can read it for yourself. You can read it for yourself and see if it says it has a beginning and tricked by out of nothing. Let's see, fine-tuning, okay. The scientific community has looked at and dropped every objection you brought up. There's the trends. Do you think it's the ultimate infinite multiverse, or how do you explain the fine-tuning?
No, well, first of all, the multiverse is not posited simply as a way to explain the fine-tuning. I'm sure you recognize that it's actually a prediction from a kind of string theory and different views on that.
Actually,
so it's not a completely ad hoc way for us to fix our worldview.
No, it is. That's you're not giving the whole thing. A level 1 or level 2 multiverse, yeah, they have some evidence for that. But to say there's an infinite universe out there with an infinite number of views out there. You talked in the beginning about having, an unparsimonious. Don't make some big explanation. Explain it simply. That is the most extravagantly unparsimonious theory that I've ever seen in science. And as Christopher Isham, quantum cosmologist, said, you can kind of see things like the Big Bang is pointing to the God of the Bible when you see all these other models that are coming out, which have no evidence, pure speculation, go against a lot of really good science. And he said, when you see all these things coming out and they're going after them so strong, where the evidence doesn't point to it, there's probably something else going on besides just an intellectual thing. Probably a or a resistance.
Yeah, I can't really respond to that. That's just an assertion of someone that said something about a whole bunch of things that I would have to look into those claims, I guess. But no, I don't think that. I think that to assume that cosmologists are working because they don't like the God of the Bible, I think that's just a completely arrogant thing to say about these people. I mean, why who are you to judge these people about the motivations for them? And plus, it has nothing to do with the validity of the argument. That's a complete genetic fallacy.
Can't respond to genetic fallacy. All right. As far as you claim, there's tomb robbers. That's your explanation.
It's a possible. It's better than the supernatural one, yes.
Better. The supernatural one explains the facts with total explanatory scope, power, lack of ad hoc because it came before, and yours violates half of those facts. It has horrible explanatory scope. What evidence did you bring that, aside from the fact that there was some tomb robbing back then, that Jesus was one of the victims of it? If that was the case, how did Christianity blow up to the point where they had to kick it out of Rome just 19 years later?
How does any religion blow up? How is that possibly evidence?
Not when you base it on a resurrection, not in the vague past, but where you can check it out from the exact authorities who just put Jesus down. They claimed all this right in their face. The creedal evidence, which just came out, which they just discovered, they had the entire gospel story about how Jesus died, resurrected, appeared to all these people who were still living at the time.
And you take that at face value? You just assume inerrancy? Am I supposed to do this as well?
Take it as face value? No. I take it, this is what the scholars accept as fact.
Oh, come on.
They've cataloged everything written in German, French, and English from 1975 till today. Where's your evidence?
Okay, so you're honestly under the apprehension that scholars generally hold to this kind of inerrant view of the biblical text?
Inerrant? No. They just say that
the 500 witnesses?
We had the the 500 witnesses,
okay.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. However, they said that the followers of Jesus sincerely believed he appeared to them. And this could be checked. They made the claim, that creed came out, and they made the claim right after it happened. So they had all these people there that could check. They could ask people, the 500 plus. They said, you guys saw these things. You saw the miracles. And how did they respond to the miracles? Well, if your mom says you're a good person, that's one thing. If your enemy says it, there's something to be taken care of. The Talmud, Jewish rabbinical writing, said, well, yeah, Jesus did wonders that we can't explain, but he was possessed, that's why. So that's how they explain it. So it didn't happen in a vague murky past, it happened right in their face. That was the chance to wipe out Christianity, but instead of wiping it out, it took off. And now we have this historical evidence to give us those facts, which shouldn't happen with the resurrection. And that's
11 seconds.
Okay, so now we're going to have closing statements. I think Justin will go first and Scott will go second.
Of non-resistant non-believers, the hostility to life in the vast majority of the universe, and the massive number of apparently pointless sufferings in the world. And in closing, I'm often asked why it is that I debate these issues. Do I really expect to change people's minds and pull them away from the faith tradition that they probably never reasoned themselves into? In fact, I actually don't expect anything of the sort. I do these debates because whether or not I win someone for my side is not nearly as important to me as getting people to think more carefully about the beliefs that they do have. Do you hold your beliefs simply because of these are the beliefs that your parents hold? Have you honestly looked into the beliefs that you hold? Have you read opposing sides to the beliefs that you hold? I think that if we care about people, then we should recognize that our beliefs affect our interactions with people. And we should want to investigate our beliefs, to make sure that we really are being responsible and that we are truth tracking. Now, so again, I just honestly don't think that we've been given very good reasons. The first cause of the universe, that the universe had a beginning. Again, this assumes that we are only going to be talking about classical physics that will bring us back to a particular time, and then it kind of breaks down, right? We have to invoke quantum issues, and there's a lot of different models going back and forth, and guess what? Physicists aren't positing God to explain the existence of the universe. There's tons of models out there that are seeking to explain the existence of the universe, and they do this in purely naturalistic terms. God just isn't found in the physics departments. That's not to say that people can't believe in God and hold to contemporary physics. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting simply that God isn't really necessary to come up with these models. There are perfectly self-contained models of the universe. And when it comes to fine-tuning, again, the particular way that the constants are isn't any more or less probable than any other particular way that those constants could have been. And so, like if you were to get a full house in poker, you might think that that's special, but that's only because full house is significant prior to the deal, right? If you were to get a really poor hand in poker, but a really specifically poor hand, you wouldn't think, oh man, if this was different at all, I wouldn't have this poor of a hand in poker. No, the reason why you think a full house is important is because according to the rules of poker, prior to you getting that particular hand, it meant something. Full house meant something. It was valuable in that game. And I'm suggesting that Scott is doing the exact same thing with life. Scott's assuming that life means something prior to the deal of the cosmological constants being what they are. And I just don't find any good reason to take on board an assumption that's very much at home with a theistic view, the view that, that life is intrinsically valuable, that biological life is valuable. I just don't find any reason to think that that's at all plausible. That's not to say that there can't be naturalistic forms of ethics. I take ethics very seriously. But that's an entirely different issue when it comes to moral propositions that say life is good being true prior to the universal constants being what they are. I just don't find that at all plausible, and I don't think any thoroughgoing naturalist would find that plausible. So I don't think that this argument really be an interesting thing. His third argument was the resurrection. Of course, my view on my hypothesis was simply to explain the empty tomb, right? The idea that the tomb might be stolen would explain the empty tomb. Scott is fully aware that you can have different observations requiring different explanations. And so the fact that the stolen empty tomb doesn't account for the beliefs of the disciples, that's not a problem. You just have to have different reasons to think that that would explain it.
Well, are we all set?
Okay, sorry.
If I got full house after 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 full house, which is still far short from what we got from fine-tuning, Justin would explain it away and keep playing with me. You will lose a lot. And that's the exact same thing in the universe. You want to bet against fine-tuning, you're going to lose a lot. He says that there's tons of models. Then why didn't he give us one with evidence? He just said that he doesn't know, but he's certain that it's not God. If he would have gave a model, I would have shown you. They don't work. He said his argument's an entirely inaccurate, he based the non-resistant unbeliever on an entirely inaccurate understanding of his main concept, the non-resistant unbeliever, and having to ignore other critical elements like free will. The suffering argument stands on speculation raised to an unknown lack of humility exponent in an incomplete set of equations and missing variables. Even if one could demonstrate pointless suffering, it is equally in line with allowing free will and natural cause and effect sufficient free run to permit true choice between God's way or a different way. I appreciate the hostility argument as it spotlights atheist-resistant unbelief and entirely supports fine-tuning. As a Christian, I stand on subjective evidence as God reaches to me as an individual. And I also stand on objective evidence of science that the scholars accept, history that the scholars accept, and in every field of thought. Atheism had two great opportunities to ruin Christianity. Christians believed a specific type of beginning and cause, which went against science, atheism, and almost every belief system up till modern times. But whoa, now we find the Bible is right. Did he give us examples of humans coming close to what the Bible predicted? Didn't give any examples, just kind of skirted around those facts. And the fact that a predictive model is one of the best criteria, that the model is the right one. The beginning links to a cause with the exact properties of the only type of cause that fits the requirements modern science discovered. The cause also links to mind-blowing fine-tuning, which makes it rationally inescapable that the cause is a personal agent with a purpose, or an infinite multiverse. Unless you believe in that no evidence, fatally scientific and logically flawed, infinite type of multiverse. That multiverse would still require a beginning, a cause, and fine-tuning. The personal agency just didn't walk away after all that purpose, but links directly into the ultimate personal touch and answers our personal struggles, suffering, longings, frailty, with not just an explanation, but with a personal answer in Jesus. Atheism was given another gimme, a resurrection claim not given in the vague prehistoric past, but instead, we get the scholarship accepting the facts, which is explained perfectly with the resurrection, and all natural explanations are just as desperately grasping as the infinite multiverse, which you can check for yourself, hallucination, mileage, and so on. But it is not the naturalist's fault, as they are just following their molecules in motion by natural laws and cannot control it. If you're an atheist, you shouldn't have reasonable doubts, but these are phenomenal doubts. Did atheism provide a better explanation for the beginning, cause, fine-tuning, resurrection, of free will? You can rewatch the YouTube video and see. If you want to found your beliefs on speculation and subjective thoughts, and find ways to wash off the objective evidence that covers this world, you'll always be able to go home to atheist internet safe havens. You can try to not think about it when you're going to sleep, and you can always be able to find reasons to reject God. However, that doesn't change the fact that there is a line of truth outside all of our doors, which we'll run into maybe on the ride home, maybe in 70 years. And if you think you're going to have a good excuse before an almighty God that died for you and waited for you, but you rejected, it's just not a safe bet. I've always had a problem with authority. I've been fully punched in the head by 2 teachers and a principal, got into it with the judge, even screamed and cursed at my incredibly loving dad. But I realized God is an authority I am not going to win against, and one I've actually come to love. As he has my best interest in mind, demonstrated he knows way beyond what I do, and is the only way to get the best out of this life, and especially the next. Is life about the purposes that you pursue, or is there a purpose that pursues you? The former you can only hold in a wet paper bag. The latter brings gains that you can never lose.